Imagine the most terrifying dictator in modern history.
Okay, yeah.
Now imagine realizing that a children's book about, flying brooms and magical candies paints a more accurate psychological portrait of his rise to power than, like, most political science textbooks.
It really is wild when you frame it like that.
Right. Today, we're unpacking how a story about a boy wizard became this absolute masterclass in political satire, media corruption, and the psychology of fascism.
It's an incredible evolution because you start with something that feels like pure whimsicalism.
Right.
And then before you know it, you are waist deep in this massive exploration of systemic injustice and, well, mortal sacrifice.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are so glad you're here with us. We have a massive, truly fascinating stack of sources to get through today. So, okay, let's unpack this.
Let's do it.
Our primary text is this sprawling, highly personal,
Yeah.
and just deeply analytical video transcript by a creator named Huston Coley. It's titled, What Harry Potter Means to Me.
Yeah.
And we also have a quick little snippet just confirming his channel name.
Right, which is important for context.
Exactly. And alongside that, we're looking at a historical text titled The Fallacy of Hitler's Ancestry, which we will definitely get into.
Yeah, we have a lot of ground to cover with that one.
For sure. But the mission of this deep dive is to deconstruct a massive cultural touchstone through the eyes of a superfan. We want to explore how a bedtime story evolved into this highly complex commentary on government, morality, mythology.
All of it.
Yeah, all of it, while also navigating the incredibly bumpy transition from the written page to the silver screen.
It is a massive undertaking. I mean, we are dissecting a phenomenon that completely defined the cultural landscape for an entire generation.
Literally a generation.
And what makes this particular analysis so compelling is how it balances the incredibly personal with the intensely analytical.
I have to say, the sheer volume of reading and rereading required for this one was intense. I felt like I was back in university.
I know exactly what.
But it was so worth it because we have this brilliant contrast in the source material.
Mm-hmm.
On one hand, you have pure, unadulterated childhood nostalgia.
Yeah.
Like Huston shares an actual journal entry from when he was 8 years old, completely obsessing over Emma Watson.
Which, let's be honest, is incredibly relatable for anyone who grew up then.
Oh, 100%. But then, in the exact same breath, he pivots to these incredibly heavy themes.
Which perfectly mirrors the trajectory of the series itself.
Right.
Because the narrative starts with the whimsical. A giant man breaking down a door to hand a kid a birthday cake.
Classic.
And then it moves inevitably toward profound, the perilous, and the deeply political. But it's interesting is where this retrospective actually begins.
Yeah, he doesn't start at the beginning.
Exactly. Instead of starting with the magic, it starts with the current, rather sobering reality of the franchise.
I thought that was such a sharp way to open the discussion.
Yeah.
Because looking at where the franchise sits right now perfectly sets up why we even need to look backwards. Huston argues that the franchise today is, in his words, stale and dead.
Ouch.
Yeah. Strong words. And he points a very direct finger at Warner Bros. And J.K. Rowling for essentially refusing to let the intellectual property rest.
The central argument here is really about the mismanagement of the nostalgia cycle.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, the studio pushed the Fantastic Beasts movies far too soon after the main series ended.
Right, they forced out these prequel movies.
Planning 5 of them initially. Crazy.
That was crazy.
And frankly, the core audience hadn't asked for them and wasn't emotionally prepared to invest in them yet. And then you have the stage play, The Cursed Child.
Right, which was heavily marketed to the masses as the 8th epic story.
Yeah.
And they wrapped it in a book jacket to sell it, even though it's a script that only really functions properly if you actually see it performed live in a theater with, multi-million-dollar stage illusion.
Exactly. You can't just read it like a novel and expect the same emotional resonance.
No, it just doesn't work that way.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, it's a fundamental misunderstanding of how cultural longing works.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if the creators had if they had let the franchise lie dormant for 15 or 20 years.
Like a lot of other franchises, too.
Waiting until that original core demographic of fans were in their 30s and 40s, the hype around a return to that world would have been absolutely monumental.
It's like an overwatered houseplant.
Oh, that's a good way to put it.
Sometimes you just have to leave it alone. Step back, let the soil dry out for the thing to actually thrive and grow. You can't just keep dumping water on it every single day and expect it to yield fruit indefinitely.
Yeah, that's spot on.
But I have to push back a little here.
Okay.
Is the franchise really dead? Or is it just resting? Like, are we seeing genuine franchise fatigue? Or is the mainstream public is totally blind to the nuances that make this specific series different from standard run-of-the-mill fantasy?
That's a really vital distinction. And it ties directly into how the fantasy genre itself has shifted drastically over the last decade.
How so?
Well, the very specific subgenre that deals with medieval aesthetics, sorcerers, dragons, and goblins, that experienced a massive peak right around the release of the final film, Deathly Hallows Part.
Right. And then almost immediately, that specific flavor of fantasy started to decline.
Yeah.
You see it starting to taper off with the Hobbit trilogy. It just didn't hold the cultural zeitgeist in the same way.
Precisely. That traditional swords and sorcery escapism was heavily sought after in the early 2000s. Post 9/11, audiences deeply craved clear, black and white, good versus narratives.
That makes a lot of sense.
But today, that void has been completely filled by a different genre entirely.
Superhero movies.
Exactly. The superhero epics of Marvel and the revitalized sci-fi fantasy of Star Wars, those IPs have completely cannibalized the space that traditional magic fan is to occupy.
Because the mainstream public just lumps it all together. They see magic, spells, and dragons and think, oh, it's just another tired mythical trope.
Yeah, they miss the whole point.
They entirely miss the fact that this series is actually set in a version of our present-day real world. It's not happening in some distant Middle Earth or a galaxy far, far away.
No.
It's happening in London.
Yeah.
Right alongside traffic jams and underground train stations.
And that specific grounding in reality is what allowed the phenomenon to explode the way it did, particularly because of the technological era it coincided with.
Oh, right.
Because what's fascinating here is the intersection of the book's release schedule and the dawn of the global internet.
Oh, the timing was absolute, undeniable perfection.
It really was.
The early 2000s boom of this series coincided exactly with the moment the internet was transitioning from a niche tool for tech enthusiasts to something everyone had in their home.
Yeah, the wild west of the web.
We're talking about the era of dial-up internet, rudimentary fan sites, the birth of global forums, and those wild early days of YouTube.
It fostered an unprecedented global community. I mean, before this, being a fan of a book series was a largely solitary experience.
Right, or maybe shared with a few friends at school.
Exactly. But suddenly, fans could go to a midnight book release, devour a 700-page novel in under 24 hours, and immediately log on to MuggleNet or the Leaky Cauldron to dissect every single chapter, every hidden clue, with people halfway across the world.
The fan theories were insane.
Oh, they were...
People were writing literal thesis-level essays on what wand woods meant or analyzing background characters. And the YouTube parodies.
I know exactly what you're going to say.
If you were on the internet in the mid-2000s, you remember the Potter Puppet Pals?
Oh, the ticking noise.
Yes. Huston actually starts humming that classic viral animated video in his essay, the Snape Severus Snape song. That audio is permanently burned into the brain of an entire generation.
It became a shared cultural vocabulary.
Totally. And Huston shares these great personal anecdotes to illustrate just how all-consuming this craze was.
He's a cardboard cutout.
Yes. He talks about making his parents drag home a massive life-sized cardboard standee of Harry from a movie theater.
That's dedication.
And he talks about introducing himself at a new school by literally standing up and saying, "Hi, I'm Huston, and I love Harry Potter more than anything on the planet."
It wasn't just a book they like. It became an identity marker.
Exactly.
And the sheer scale of the financial and cultural success reflects that. The author became the first person to ever reach billionaire status strictly from writing books.
Which is an astonishing economic reality.
It really is.
And then, amazingly, she became the first person to subsequently lose that billionaire status because she donated so much of her wealth to charity.
Wow.
It's a real-life narrative, almost as dramatic as the fiction. But seeing that kind of unprecedented textual phenomenon inevitably leads us to the physical manifestation of it. Because Hollywood was obviously going to come knocking.
Oh, of course they were. And what Hollywood achieved here is arguably the most ambitious cinematic experiment in the history of film.
Experiment is definitely the right word.
It truly is. Because the logistics of a 10-year, consistent production schedule, following the same core cast as they physically grew up on screen.
It had never been done before.
No, and it arguably hasn't been replicated since.
It's staggering when you actually break down the logistics. 10 years. They kept the exact same primary location, essentially taking over Leavesden Studios and turning it into a functioning magical world.
Right.
They kept the same core cast of children, avoiding the recastings that usually plague long-running series.
And the adults, too.
Yeah. They maintained an absolutely incredible roster of British acting royalty. People like Maggie Smith, Alan Rickman, Gary Oldman, John Hurt.
Unbelievable talent.
And perhaps most surprisingly, in an industry known for constant rewrite, they kept the exact same screenwriter, Steve Kloves, for almost all 8 films.
That continuity behind the scenes is what anchored the franchise and gave it a unified voice. But it's vital to recognize that this continuity was heavily protected by the author's strict stipulations.
Right, she had rules.
She absolutely insisted the films be shot exclusively in the United Kingdom.
Which was a massive risk at the time.
Huge risk.
She refused to let it go to Hollywood and become some cheap Americanized lunchbox cash grab. By keeping it in England, they utilized a massive proportion of the British film industry. The makeup artists, the lighting designers, the incredibly skilled set builders.
It gave the films a distinct, tangible texture. It felt British, which is essential to the tone of...
Absolutely.
And within that fiercely protected, consistent framework, the producers made the brilliant decision to allow for visual and tonal evolution by rote.
Right. You had Chris Columbus, then Alfonso Cuarón, Mike Newer, and finally David Yates, who brought the final 4 films home.
Exactly.
Okay, I have to jump in here and play devil's advocate regarding Chris Columbus.
Go for it.
A lot of critics, and even a lot of fans, look back at those first 2 Columbus movies and brush them off as just kids' fluff.
Yeah, that's a common...
They feel incredibly dated, very bright, almost like holiday specials compared to the gritty, dark realism that Cuarón brought in the third.
So, was Columbus really a visionary, or was he just a safe, reliable studio bet to get the franchise off the ground without ruffling any feathers?
Well, it's a fair critique of the aesthetic, sure, but the architectural contribution Columbus made cannot be overstated.
Okay, how so?
Yes, his films are warmer and more traditional, but he laid the absolutely vital, unshakable foundation for the entire cinematic universe. Think about what he established. Exactly. The perfect casting of the trio, the massive physical sets like the Great Hall that were used for the entire decade, the overall earnest tone. And he brought in John Williams to create that iconic musical score.
Here's where it gets really... Because you're right, you cannot bring in a visionary auteur like Alfonso Cuarón to completely shake things up in the third movie.
Right, you can't just jump to that. To darken the color grading, to let the kids wear street clothes, to introduce handheld cameras. You can't do that if you don't have a rock-solid foundation to build on.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Cuarón's subversion only works because Columbus provided that classic old Hollywood structural integrity first.
That makes perfect sense.
And a massive part of that integrity came from Columbus's dedication to practical film. The crews at Leavesden prioritized practical effects over CGI whenever humanly possible.
Right. Real animatronic creatures, massive physical models of the castle, real chemical explosions.
Real physical sets that the actors could touch and interact.
That is exactly why those early 2000s films don't look entirely dated today in the way that heavily CGI-reliant movies from the same era do.
Yeah.
They built the world practically, which gives it a physical weight that a green screen just can't replicate.
But despite all that careful planning, the entire 10-year experiment almost derailed halfway through.
Well, this is wild.
There was a critical moment where Emma Watson seriously considered leaving the franchise after the...
Can you imagine? The entire continuity of the series just shattered right in the middle of the saga.
It would have been devastating for the film.
She ultimately stayed because, in her own words, she couldn't bear the thought of watching the movies continue being made without her being a part of them.
Which is totally understandable.
But it just highlights the immense localized pressure these young actors were under, living your entire adolescence on a soundstage while carrying a multi-billion-dollar franchise on your shoulders.
It's immense pressure, but seeing Daniel Radcliffe externalize that pressure on screen makes you realize what cinema simply cannot do.
What's that?
It can't put you inside a character's head. As monumental and successful as the films were, compressing a sprawling literary epic into a visual medium inevitably results in massive translation.
The transition from page to screen is never seamless.
No, never.
The most glaring difference when you analyze the two mediums is the loss of internal depth. In the books, Harry is a highly internal character.
Very much so.
Roughly 80% of his life, his deductions, anger, and his decision-making process is an internal soliloquy. The reader is entirely privy to his psychological...
And that's the inherent limitation of the cinematic medium. On film, you have to dramatize the...
Right.
Daniel Radcliffe has to somehow show all of that complex, brawling internal dialogue external, usually through facial expressions or forced expositional dialogue.
So hard.
It's a nearly impossible task to convey that level of psychological nuance without resorting to a constant overbearing. And it's not just the protagonist who suffers from this compression. The antagonist's portrayal draft, too.
Oh, Voldemort is the perfect example.
Definitely.
In the films, without the benefit of extensive exposition, he often comes across as a somewhat standard fantasy super.
Yeah, he's scary, but
He's terrifying. And Ralph Fiennes brings incredible charisma to the role. But narrative, he's pretty straightforward. He wants power, he wants to kill the hero, standard bad guys.
But the literature approaches him entirely.
Right.
The sixth book, Half-Blood Prince, dedicates almost 90% of its narrative real estate to exploring Tom Riddle's intricate backstory.
Which is so fascinating.
It really is.
The book delves so deeply into the nature versus nurture argument of his psychopathy. It explores his mother, Merope Gaunt, using a love potion to coerce his father.
A huge detail.
It explores his deeply impoverished, loveless upbringing in an orphan. It examines the specific, chilling choices he made as a young man to mutilate his own soul.
And by cutting the vast majority of that historical context out, the film stripped the villain of his psychological profile.
You lose the nuance.
You lose the terrifying realization that Tom Riddle wasn't just born a monster. He was a product of generational trauma and his own specific sociopathic choices.
Yeah.
And beyond character depth, this compression also creates massive using plot holes for the cat.
Oh my gosh, yes. We've all had that moment, right? You watch a movie adaptation of a book you love, you follow along perfectly, and then halfway through you realize you are just projecting your own knowledge of the book onto the screen.
Oh, absolutely.
You suddenly realize the movie itself never actually explained what was happening.
The mirror fragment is the quintessential example.
Aberforth's mirror.
In the final films, Harry has a shard of a mirror that he constantly, and he uses it to communicate with Aberforth Dumbledore to mount a rescue. The film relies heavily on this object for a major plot resolution.
Right.
But it never actually sets up where he got it, why he has it, or how the magic of it works.
It's completely baffling if you haven't read the books. In the text, that mirror is a deeply emotional gift from his godfather, Sirius Black, given multiple books prior. It has immense sentimental and narrative weight.
It means so much.
But in the movie, it just sort of appears in his hand. It's what we might call an unearned plot. When you condense a 700-page, intricately plotted book into a 2.5-hour movie, you are forced to turn complex, interwoven storyline into sudden, convenient plot devices.
You also have to flatten complex theme to recognizable archetype. We see this clearly with the chosen one trope.
Well, definitely.
The books go to great lengths to make the overarching prophecy. It actively questions the nature of destiny and fortune-telling, suggesting that the prophecy only matters because Voldemort chose to believe it.
Which is such a cool concept.
But the films streamline it, making it feel much more akin to the straightforward, predetermined destiny Star Wars.
Now, to be fair, adaptation isn't always about loss. Sometimes the visual medium allows for emotional beats that the text couldn't quite capture. There are movie-exclusive editions that actually elevate the material.
Oh, for sure. The quiet, unspoken dance, Harry and Hermione in Deathly Hallows Part 1, is a masterclass.
Such a beautiful, melancholy moment.
It really is.
They're isolated, terrified, their friend has abandoned them, and for just 2 minutes, they dance to a song on a crackling radio. It's not romantic, it's a desperate attempt to feel human for a second.
Exactly.
That isn't in the book at all, and it is arguably one of the best scenes in the entire franchise. And you also have the movie-exclusive romance between Neville Longbottom and Luna Lovegood.
Oh yeah, that was entirely for the films.
And it just felt so right. It gave both characters a really satisfying emotional resolution amid the absolute chaos of a battle.
But even with those brilliant cinematic additions, the core truth remained. If the movies occasionally simplified the mechanics of the story, the books absolutely thrived on deep, challenging morality.
Which takes us right into the actual soul of the narrative. This isn't just a story about learning spells and fighting trolls.
No, not at all.
It's a profoundly intricate exploration of morality, authority, and human flaw. One of the core virtues taught by the series is that the authority in place, whether it's a respected teacher or a high-ranking government official, is never the ultimate authority.
Your own internal moral compass is.
Yes.
It is a narrative that actively teaches its young readers that breaking the rules in order to help people is a virtue. It encourages questioning the status quo, challenging bureaucratic mandates, and trusting your own judgment over a rulebook.
But, and this is a crucial distinction, the books also make it painfully clear that rebellion has consequences.
It does.
It's not just a power fantasy of blind, consequence-free disobedience. The protagonist's impulsivity and hot-headedness frequently get him into massive, sometimes deadly trouble.
Think back to the very first book. Harry assumes Professor Snape is the villain attempting to steal the Sorcerer's Stone. He actively subverts school rules to go after him, only to discover at the climax that Snape was actually trying to protect him the entire time. Harry's assumption, based entirely on his own prejudices and snap judgments against a strict teacher, is completely wrong.
It teaches the reader that even the hero has massive lapses in judgment. You don't always have all the facts, just because you are the protagonist.
Exactly.
And that leads to a massive thematic pillar of the series. No one is purely good, and no one is purely evil.
This raises an important question about how literature shapes our understanding of morality during childhood.
Because it's usually so simple.
Right. In traditional fairy tales, the lines are stark. The knight is good, the dragon is bad. But here, every single character is presented as a complex shade of gray.
The contradictions are incredible when you list them out.
Let's hear them.
James Potter, the hero's idolized, martyred father, is revealed in a memory to have been an arrogant, cruel bully in his youth. He tormented kids for fun.
That was a huge shock for readers.
And on the flip side, Severus Snape was vindictive, elitist, and genuinely cruel to his students. He is a terrible, yet he possessed the immense, quiet bravery required to act as a double agent for years and ultimately die to protect the son of the woman he loved.
And then there is Dumbledore, the ultimate wise, bearded mentor figure.
Oh boy, Dumbledore.
Over the course of the series, he is systematic instructed. He is revealed to be deeply flawed, possessing a dark history with magical supremacy, and harboring a Machiavellian willingness to manipulate people, including Harry, for the greater good.
It's rough to realize that.
There's a pivotal quote from the character Sirius Black that perfectly encapsulates this. The world isn't split simply into good people and deaths.
We've all had that crushing moment, right? You grow up and suddenly you look around and realize your parents or your favorite teachers or your childhood heroes aren't perfect, infallible superheroes.
No, they're not.
They're just flawed, messy human beings doing the best they can with their own baggage. That's the exact transition from childhood to adulthood that Harry experienced.
And the brilliance of the source material is that this moral complexity isn't confined to individual character studies.
No.
The author didn't just write complex people. She built a complex, flawed society. The personal moral grayness extends outward into massive, systemic...
If you thought this was just a whimsical fantasy about flying brooms, look closer. Because the magical world is, at its core, a sharp, biting, and often depressing satire of our own modern reality.
It really is.
It is a society that is deeply hierarchical, blatantly prejudiced, and systematically oppressed.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the author is making a profound sociological. Having access to magic might solve mundane, everyday problems like doing the dishes with a wave of a wand or traveling long distances instantly, but it doesn't solve human nature.
No, it just amplifies it.
In fact, it creates massive, deeply entrenched institutional inequality place.
Systemic blindness is everywhere in these books. Look at Ron Weasley. We love Ron. He is a good-hearted, fiercely loyal, brave character.
Yeah, he's a fan favorite.
But because he grew up entirely within this magical system, he accepts the literal slavery of house elves as totally normal. When Hermione starts a campaign to free them, Ron laughs at her.
He thinks she's ridiculous.
He is completely blind to the systemic injustice because to him, it's just the way things are.
It requires the perspective of an outsider, someone like Hermione, who grew up in the non-magical muggle world, to look at the structure and immediately recognize the horror of it.
Exactly.
It's a brilliant, subtle commentary on how easily good, normal people can become complicit in entirely corrupt systems simply through the power of normalization and tradition.
And how do those corrupt systems maintain power and convince people that everything is fine, the exact same way they do in our world, through the media and the government working in tandem.
Ah, yes. The media.
The breakdown of the media landscape in this fictional universe is chillingly accurate to our modern reality.
It identifies three distinct tiers of media manipulation. First, you have Rita Skeeter, who represents the lowest rung of tabloid journalism.
Oh, she's the worst.
She uses a literal quick quotes quill that magically strips all nuance and context from a subject's spoken word, twisting them into sensationalized, gossipy headlines to sell.
It's the magical equivalent of modern clickbait algorithms or Twitter.
Very much so.
Taking a fragment of a quote, removing all the context, and weaponizing it to provoke outrage. Then you have the Daily Prophet, which is supposed to be the mainstream, respected paper of record.
Right, the trustworthy source.
But the Prophet doesn't usually print blatant, outright lie. Instead, it takes a grain of factual truth and strips out all the subjectivity and context to print slander that directly serves the government's current political agenda.
And finally, you have the Quibbler, representing the fringe alternative media. It often prints absurd, baseless conspiracy theories about magical creatures, but occasionally it is the only publication willing to stumble upon and print the actual truth that the mainstream media refuses to touch for fear of government reprisal.
Because the Ministry of Magic is not a bastion of justice. Specifically under Minister Cornelius Fudd, the government is shown as a deeply flawed bureaucracy, primarily concerned with the illusion of control and maintaining the status quo.
The ministry actively changes laws on a whim to suit their needs. They orchestrate massive cover-ups of inconvenient truths like the return of Voldemort.
And the Dementors.
Yes, they even deploy Dementors, creatures that literally suck the hope and clear thought from a person's mind at legal hearings just to intimidate witnesses and ensure the defendant can't mount a proper, clear-headed defense.
It's terrifying. They literally strip away clear, independent thought to maintain their grip on power. Now, if the government is that corrupt and the media is entirely compromised and acting as a mouthpiece, it creates a massive societal power vacuum.
A dangerous one.
And that vacuum is the perfect breeding ground for a populist dictator, which leads to the very heavy and very explicit historical parallels drawn between the fictional villain Voldemort and the real-world dictator Adolf Hitler.
This is a critical juncture in our analysis, and we need to navigate it carefully, presenting exactly what the historical texts and ours provide.
Of course.
Huston Coley's essay draws direct structural comparison. He notes that both Voldemort and Hitler built their regimes on the promise of eradicating a specific subset of the population, purify society. Muggle-borns in the fiction and Jewish people in reality. Both instituted government registries to track these minority populations, and both relentlessly prioritized the dangerous pseudoscientific concept of pure blood.
Huston also points out that both figures came to power by utilizing the exact same psychological tactics, preying on the fears, resentments, and economic anxieties of followers who had recently lost a major war.
Right.
In reality, it was Germany after the devastating defeat and economic ruin of World War I. In the fiction, it was the Death Eaters who had been pushed to the fringes after the First Wizarding War. Both groups felt disenfranchised and were desperate for a strong man to return them to a perceived state of former societal glory.
Now, within this psychological comparison, Huston's essay claims an ideological paradox. He notes, accurately according, that Voldemort is a half-blood, the son of a Muggle, the very thing he seeks to destroy.
Right, that's textual fact.
Huston then claims that Hitler had Jewish ancestry, arguing that both men were ultimately driven by a subconscious, venomous self-loathing regarding their own impure...
Wait, I need to jump in here because Huston makes a massive historical claim in his essay with that point.
He does.
But looking at our second source text, the fallacy of Hitler's ancestry, that is entirely a myth. It's factually incorrect.
Yes, it is.
The historical source definitively states that Huston is, quote, wrong about that in any way, shape, or form, and clarifies that Hitler never had Jewish ancestry. So Huston is building a psychological theory on a historical inaccuracy.
It's an essential correction. But while the historical fact regarding Hitler's ancestry in Huston's essay is flawed, we can still analyze the broader literary argument he is attempting to make regarding the fictional character of Voldemort and the nature of fascism in general.
So what does this all mean for the story? Even with Huston getting the history wrong, his broader literary point about Voldemort's hypocrisy still holds up, right?
Yeah.
The profound hypocrisy of fascistic leaders.
Exactly. The thematic point, villains who crave absolute power will weaponize whatever subconscious prejudices and fears are prevalent in society, regardless of their own actual backgrounds or supposed ideology.
They just use what worked.
Right. Voldemort didn't necessarily care about blood purity as a sacred, fundamental truth. He recognized it as a highly effective political tool to gain fiercely loyal followers among the wealthy, prejudiced. He leveraged their existing bigotry for his own.
It is a dark, heavy mirror held up to human history. To see the mechanisms of authoritarianism laid out so clearly in a book sold to 10-year-olds is astounding.
It's incredibly bold writing.
But taking a breath from the real-world horror, the author didn't just build this world on political science and satire. She also wove a massive hidden architecture of mythology right into the very DNA of the story.
And the transition from political allegory to mythological integration is seamless. The lore of the books cleverly implies that all of our real-world Muggle myths and legends, Greek gods, Roman figures, magical creatures, are actually just early, misunderstood exposures to real wizards before the magical world went into hiding.
I absolutely love this aspect. It's world building at its finest. The etymology, the name origins are just brilliant. Every single name is a clue. It's like a puzzle for the reader to solve.
What's fascinating here is how these names function as subconscious foreshadow. They tell you exactly who the character is before they
Like Sirius Black.
take Sirius Black.
Yeah.
He is an animagus, a wizard who can transform into an animal, and he specifically turns into a black dog. He is named after Sirius, which is literally known in astronomy as the dog star.
I love that one.
Or Remus Lupin, a man afflicted with lycanthropy who transforms into a werewolf. Remus refers to the Roman mythological founder raised by wolves, and Lupin is derived from lupus, the Latin word for wolf.
And it gets even more obscure and rewarding the deeper you dig. The stuttering, nervous, two-faced Professor Quirrell.
Yeah.
His first name is Quirinus, named directly after the Roman god Janus, who literally had two faces.
Incredible.
The caretaker Argus Filch, who roams the halls and seems to see every single rule being broken. He's named after the mythical Greek giant Argus Panop, who had all-seeing eyes covering his entire body. It's a delight to uncover these literary Easter eggs.
And she didn't stop at ancient mythology. The author also utilized Victorian flower language to encode profound meaning into character relations.
This blew my mind.
The protagonist's mother is named Lily, a flower historically representing innocence, purity, and beauty of heart. Her deeply bitter resentster, who raises Harry terribly, Petunia. In Victorian flower language, a petunia represents anger, resentment, and a lack of hope.
Even the physical tools they use, the wands, are loaded with a specific meaning. The wand woods dictate the nature of the wizard.
Yes, the wand's lore is so dense.
Voldemort uses a wand made of yew. Yew trees are poisonous, they are traditionally planted in graveyards across Europe, and they symbolize both death and immortality, which is Voldemort's entire singular obsession.
And Harry's wand.
On the flip side, Harry uses a wand made of holly, which historically symbolizes good luck and protection from evil. You have to marvel at the sheer intentionality of this construct. J.K. Rowling spent 5 full years just planning, charting this lore, and building the rules of this universe before she ever published a single word.
That meticulous, years-long planning is what allows the world to feel so robust, but the mythology goes much, much deeper than Greek gods and Victorian flora. As we approach the climax of the narrative, we realize it all culminates in a massive, overarching religious allegory that entirely defines the final act.
This is where the story elevates from a fantasy adventure to an exploration of the soul. And there's a massive, almost comical irony regarding this religious aspect.
There really is.
In the early days of the franchise, certain Christian groups heavily opposed the book, trying to ban them from schools for promoting witchcraft and sorcery.
The irony being that by focusing entirely on the superficial, surface-level aesthetic of magic wands and cauldrons, they completely missed the deeply embedded Christian allegory that serves as the moral and structural foundation of the entire narrative arc.
They missed the forest for the trees.
Exact. The author has explicitly stated that she deliberately hid this allegory in the book so people wouldn't.
Let's break down these parallels, because once you see them, you can't unsee. Harry's journey heavily parallels the story of Christ.
It does.
He is described as being uniquely part human and part wizard, paralleling the part human, part God dynamic. He gathers a core group of loyal disciples. He is persecuted by the governing body for speaking an inconvenient truth, and ultimately, he willingly walks into a forest to lay down his own life, dies, and then resurrects to save his people.
And towering above him in this allegorical structure is Dumbledore, who serves as a clear parallel to God the Father.
Which is tricky, right?
This is a complex comparison because, as we discussed, Dumbledore is flawed in a way the theological God is not. But functionally within the narrative, Dumbledore is the all-knowing, bearded mentor who loves his surrogate son deeply, yet meticulous, somewhat rude, orchestrates his ultimate sacrifice for
The allegory even extends to the magical artifact. The mysterious Deathly Hallows themselves, 3 incredibly powerful magical artifacts introduced in the final book, map perfectly onto the Holy Trinity.
It's a deeply compelling structural arc. The all-powerful Elder Wand represents the power of the Father. The Resurrections brings back echoes of the dead to comfort and represents the Son. And the Invisibility Cloak, an unseen, ever-present protective force, represents...
It's so clear when you spell it out.
Together, legend says they make one a master of death. But the entire thesis of the story argues that true mastery isn't about wielding power to avoid death, but finding the peace sept mortality.
This entire philosophy is cemented by 2 literal tombstone inscriptions found in the books, both pulled directly, word for word, from the Bible.
Yes.
J.K. Rowling claims these 2 verses define the entire series.
Yeah.
The first is from Matthew 6. Where your treasure is, there your heart will be also.
That verse perfectly defines Voldemort's fatal tragedy. He is entirely material. His treasure is his own earthly, physical life, which he desperately tries to preserve by tearing his soul apart and hiding physical objects, Horcruxes.
Because he's so terrified of dying.
Right. Because his treasure is bound to earthly, destructible items like diaries and cups, his soul becomes tethered, mutilated, and ultimate. He entirely fails to understand anything beyond the material. He cannot comprehend love or...
And the second verse from 1 Corinthians 15 reads, "The last enemy that shall be destroyed is death." I love how the two main characters interpret this so differently.
It's the core conflict.
Voldemort reads that verse as a man. He sees it as a command to conquer death through dark magic, violence, and physical immortality. But Harry slowly learns the true meaning. The only way to genuinely master death is to accept it willingly out of love for others.
It is the ultimate thematic clash of the entire saga. Voldemort views death as the ultimate enemy to be beaten, a humiliation to be avoided at the cost of his own humanity. Harry embraces death to save his friends, and in doing so, he destroys the enemy's power over him entirely.
And what's so incredible, what ties the whole magical system together, is that in this universe, sacrificial love isn't just a warm, fuzzy emotion or a metaphor.
No, it's real.
It is literal, ancient, supernatural magic. When Harry's mother dies for him in the beginning, and later when Harry willingly walks to his death for his friends at Hogwarts, that act of pure, selfless sacrifice leaves a physical, magical shield on the recipients. It is a tangible defensive force that Voldemort literally cannot penetrate. Love is a weapon and a shield.
Which brings this sprawling 10-year epic back down to its most foundational human element. You can strip away the wands, the intricate magical creatures, the biting political satire, and the sweeping theological allegories. When you remove all of that, what are you fundamentally left?
You're left with the core emotional truth that Huston beautifully summarizes at the very end of his massive retrospect. Beneath all the noise, the lore, and the merchandise, this is simply a story about a lonely, abused child finding a home.
That's it.
It's about a boy who grew up in a cupboard with nothing, discovering relationships, deep friendships, and chosen family that are so profoundly strong, they literally endure beyond death.
And that, ultimately, is the mark of true literature. It has the immense capacity to read exactly where they are.
Well said.
If you are an 8-year-old child, it's a thrilling, colorful adventure about getting a magic wand, sneaking out of bed, and fighting. If you are a young adult, it's a complex story about the messy realities of friendship, puberty, and child authority. And if you're an adult reading it years later, it is a sobering, dark reflection of systemic injustice, the corruption of media, the very nature.
It is a photograph that reveals more and more detail every single time you look. We've covered a massive amount of ground today, from the dawn of dial-up internet fandoms to the intricate architecture of mythological etymology and historical fascist parallel.
We've seen how a single story can function brilliantly as both an escapist fantasy and a dark mirror reflecting society's deeply rooted flaws.
Exactly. Which leaves us with a final provocative thought for you to carry with you as you go about your day. We've talked extensively about how this fictional magical society mirrors the systemic blindness, the prejudice, and the media manipulation of our own modern reality.
Right.
If this world is indeed a dark mirror of our own flaws, we have to ask ourselves something.
Right.
What magic, what real-world equivalents of protective emotional shields, independent critical thought, and fierce sacrificial loyalty are we failing to cultivate in our own lives because we are simply too distracted by the constant overwhelming noise of our own daily profit?
A question well worth asking the next time you blindly scroll through a sensationalized headline.
Absolutely. Thank you for joining us on this incredibly deep dive. Take care of yourselves and keep questioning what you read.